10. Most inbreds families in world history. I'm in shock right now. What if we told you that some of the most shocking stories in history are hidden within the families who chose or were forced to marry within their own bloodlines? From blue-skinned descendants to families whose tragic isolation led to horrifying genetic consequences, these 10 inbred families have lived lives more extraordinary and disturbing than you could ever imagine. Prepare to be stunned as we uncover the hidden truths of these isolated bloodlines. Are you ready to dive into the dark side of human history? Subscribe to Uncovered Tinseltown Uncovered and hit the bell for more jaw-dropping revelations. Whitaker family. The Whitaker family of West Virginia, USA is one of the most shocking and disturbing examples of inbreeding in modern times. Known for their extreme isolation and the severe genetic consequences resulting from repeated intermarriage, their story gained widespread attention when it was featured in a documentary by Mark Laita on the Soft White Underbelly YouTube channel in 2020. The Whitakers live in a secluded area of Edgar County, West Virginia, a place so isolated that it has remained largely off the grid for generations. Their lifestyle and behavior were hidden from the outside world for many years, which only amplified the mystery surrounding their situation. The family's story began in the early 20th century, when members of the Whitaker family started marrying within their own bloodline. Over generations, the genetic pool became so limited that the family exhibited severe physical and mental disabilities. The family members communicate in grunts and barks, and many suffer from deformities such as facial asymmetry, uncoordinated movements, and cognitive impairments. Some members, like Ray Whitaker, are able to speak in simple words, while others struggle to communicate in more complex ways. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the Whitaker family's existence is their isolation. The family has lived off the beaten path so far removed from society that they have little to no contact with the outside world. Their home lacks basic modern amenities, and the family is known to live in a run-down house without electricity or proper sanitation. The Whitakers have been living in this condition for so long that it is hard to determine the exact extent of their family history, with some speculating that their inbreeding practices date back several generations. While some family members have sought medical help, others remain reluctant or unable to leave their secluded home. Mark Laita's documentary brought the family to the attention of the world, sparking debates about the ethics of documenting such a private and tragic situation. The Whitakers' genetic abnormalities serve as a reminder of the severe consequences of inbreeding, especially in isolated communities where limited social interactions can lead to dangerous genetic implications. Despite the disturbing nature of their story, there has been some effort to assist the Whitaker family. Mark Laita's GoFundMe campaign, aimed at raising money for their medical expenses and relocation, has raised awareness about their plight. However, the deeper questions of how such isolation continues to exist in modern times remain largely unanswered. The Whitakers are a tragic example of the darker side of human history, where isolation, inbreeding, and neglect intersect to create a legacy of hardship and suffering. Pharaonic family. The Pharaonic family, or the royal families of ancient Egypt, is perhaps one of the most historically significant yet troubling examples of inbreeding in the ancient world. To maintain the purity of the royal bloodline and assert their divine right to rule, many Egyptian pharaohs practiced incestuous marriages, often marrying siblings or close relatives. This practice was rooted in religious beliefs that the pharaohs were gods or the direct descendants of gods, and marrying within the family ensured that their divine power would remain untainted by foreign blood. One of the most notable examples of this is Tutankhamun, the boy king whose parents were likely siblings. Recent DNA testing has confirmed that both of his parents were closely related, likely his father Akhenaten and his sister Kia. This sibling marriage led to several genetic disorders in Tutankhamun, including clubfoot, a condition that required him to use a cane and a weakened immune system. Despite his power and the wealth that surrounded him, his health was fragile, and he passed away at the young age of 18, which has led many historians to speculate that his death was linked to the genetic disorders resulting from inbreeding. Tutankhamun was not the only pharaoh affected by this practice. His father, Akhenaten, who is best known for attempting to introduce monotheism to Egypt with the worship of Aton, was also likely the product of incest. Akhenaten's reign, though revolutionary, was marked by the instability caused by his radical religious changes, and some historians argue that inbreeding may have contributed to his controversial decisions and poor health. The famous Nefertiti, Akhenaten's queen, is believed by some scholars to have been his sister, further perpetuating the tradition of sibling marriage. In fact, the practice of sibling marriage in the royal family was not confined to Tutankhamun's generation, but was a long-standing tradition in Egypt's ruling elite, especially in the Ptolemaic dynasty. This was done to keep the power concentrated within the family, and to ensure the royal bloodline remained pure in the eyes of the gods. However, the long-term effects of this inbreeding were dire. The consequences were both physical and psychological, with members of the royal family suffering from genetic defects, weakened immune systems, and a higher rate of infant mortality. The Habsburg jaw, or the notable jaw deformities found in some European royal families, have their Egyptian parallels, showing how a history of inbreeding can lead to lasting physical traits. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which began after the death of Alexander the Great and included famous figures such as Cleopatra VII, continued this practice. Cleopatra herself famously married her brothers Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV, continuing the tradition of sibling marriage. The result was that this family, while immensely powerful, was plagued by severe genetic issues, including a high incidence of birth defects, mental health problems, and infertility. These disorders may have contributed to Cleopatra's own struggles with maintaining political power, as her reign was marred by personal and dynastic conflicts. In conclusion, the pharaonic family's use of incestuous marriages to preserve royal lineage undoubtedly shaped the course of Egyptian history. However, the tragic consequences of this practice serve as a stark reminder of the genetic costs of isolating a bloodline to maintain power. The downfall of Egypt's royal families can be partly attributed to the very practices that were meant to preserve their dynasty. The pharaonic family's history is a cautionary tale about the dangers of inbreeding, which led to both physical deformities and the eventual collapse of one of the world's most powerful civilizations. Darwin-Wedgwood family. The Darwin-Wedgwood family, a prominent British family known for its intellectual achievements and contributions to science and industry, is an example of the complex legacy that can arise from intermarriage within a family. The family's two main branches, the Darwins and the Wedgwoods, became intertwined through the marriage of Charles Darwin, the father of evolutionary theory, and his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood. While their union produced some of the most influential minds of their time, it also had tragic consequences, highlighting the potential risks of cousin marriages and the hereditary health issues they can bring. Charles Darwin, born in 1809, is best known for his groundbreaking work on the origin of species, which introduced the theory of natural selection and revolutionized our understanding of biology. However, despite his scientific genius, Darwin was deeply concerned about the genetic health of his family. He married his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, in 1839. The Wedgwoods were also a wealthy and influential family known for their contributions to the pottery industry. The union between Charles and Emma was not uncommon for the time, as it was believed that intermarriage would preserve and even enhance family traits, particularly intellectual ability. However, this practice of cousin marriage raised concerns for Charles Darwin, particularly after the death of 3 of their 10 children before the age of 11. Darwin had always been aware of the potential risks of inbreeding and was troubled by the early deaths of his children, though he also believed that their demise was due to infectious diseases, which were more easily contracted when there was a higher degree of inbreeding. Darwin himself struggled with health problems throughout his life, including chronic illnesses that doctors were unable to diagnose. His concerns about his children's health led him to record his thoughts on inbreeding and its potential negative effects. Despite the family's remarkable achievements, the consequences of their intermarriage were clear. Charles and Emma's surviving children, such as George Darwin and Henrietta Darwin, grew up to have healthy lives. But the fact that 3 of their children died young and that others had issues was deeply troubling to Charles. Charles Darwin himself had doubts about his own genetic legacy and the risks of passing on inherited conditions, even though none of his surviving children exhibited major physical deformities. Moreover, the marriage between Charles Darwin and Emma Wedgwood was not only a personal choice but also reflected the broader social norms of their time, where cousin marriages were common among the English upper classes. While Darwin's groundbreaking theory of evolution would eventually change the course of science, his family's health challenges revealed the complexities and potential dangers of hereditary traits and the long-term effects of marrying within close kin. The Darwin-Wedgwood family's legacy is one of intellectual achievement, but it also serves as a reminder of the genetic risks of inbreeding. Despite their scientific brilliance, the family was not immune to the tragic consequences of genetic defects, which would continue to be a topic of research and debate for generations to come. Darwin's own study of his family's health history, particularly his reflections on inbreeding, laid the groundwork for the study of genetics, further influencing his groundbreaking work in evolutionary biology. Windsor family. The Windsor family, the reigning monarchs of the United Kingdom, is one of the most well-known royal families in the world. However, beneath their regal title and public personas, the Windsors have faced genetic challenges due to the long-standing tradition of intermarriage within European royal families. This practice, intended to preserve political alliances and royal bloodlines, has led to significant health issues and raised questions about the genetic consequences of repeated inbreeding. Historically, royal families across Europe, including the Windsors, engaged in intermarriages to consolidate power and secure their reigns. For example, the family's ancestry includes a mixture of German, Russian, and other European royal bloodlines, many of which had their own history of intermarriage. Inbreeding was seen as a way to prevent dilution of royal blood, but the practice carried significant risks, including the inheritance of genetic disorders. One of the most prominent and discussed cases of inbreeding in the Windsor family concerns King George III, the king who ruled from 1760 to 1820. George III is infamous for his bouts of madness, which were believed to be linked to a genetic disorder. Historians and geneticists have speculated that his mental illness, thought to be porphyria, a genetic condition that causes neurological and physical symptoms, might have been exacerbated by generations of intermarriage among European royals, including the House of Hanover, to which he belonged. Porphyria, a disorder that leads to skin sensitivity, abdominal pain, and neurological symptoms, has been linked to several other royal families, suggesting that genetic predispositions for the disease were passed down through royal bloodlines. While modern medical studies have debunked some of the more sensational claims regarding King George III's condition, there is still a belief among some researchers that his madness may have been linked to inbreeding. Further down the line, Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria, also exemplified the risks associated with royal intermarriages. The couple had 9 children, and as with many royal marriages, they sought to solidify alliances by marrying into other European royal families. However, these intermarriages led to the transmission of genetic disorders, particularly the inheritance of hemophilia, a condition that impairs the blood's ability to clot, which affected their son Prince Leopold, who tragically died at the young age of 30 due to a fall that caused internal bleeding. Hemophilia was passed down through several European royal families, a consequence of intermarriage. The Windsor family continued this tradition of intermarriage well into the 20th century, which has raised concerns about the health risks for future generations. For example, Queen Elizabeth II and her husband Prince Philip were third cousins, both descended from Queen Victoria, and Prince Albert, continuing the practice of marrying close relatives. Prince Philip, in particular, was known for his concerns about the genetic health of the royal family, having experienced the early deaths of many relatives due to genetic conditions that were passed through these familial lines. While the Windsor family has seen many long-lived members, the effects of past intermarriage practices remain a concern. Today, the family has shifted away from the tradition of royal marriages with close relatives, as modern royal marriages tend to be less focused on political alliances and more on personal choice, which has mitigated the risk of further genetic issues. The Windsor family, despite their iconic status and role as the symbolic head of the United Kingdom, remains a vivid example of how the practice of royal intermarriage has led to both political and genetic consequences. Their history underscores the tension between the preservation of royal bloodlines and the inevitable toll that inbreeding takes on the genetic health of a family. The Windsors' evolution in terms of marital practices reflects not only changing social norms, but also a growing awareness of the dangers of genetic isolation. Ptolemaic Dynasty. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled Egypt from 305 BC to 30 BC, is one of the most famous examples of royal inbreeding in history. The Ptolemies' descendants of Ptolemy IV, a general under Alexander the Great, employed inbreeding as a means of maintaining the purity of their bloodline and strengthening their claim to the throne. This led to numerous health problems within the family, particularly in later generations, as repeated marriages between siblings and close relatives became a common practice. One of the most well-known members of the Ptolemaic dynasty is Cleopatra VII, who, despite her intelligence and political prowess, was the product of this inbreeding. Cleopatra married both of her brothers Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV, in keeping with the tradition of sibling marriages designed to consolidate power. The practice of sibling marriage within the royal family continued for generations, resulting in various genetic complications including mental and physical impairments within the family. The most tragic figure of this dynasty, however, might be Tutankhamun, whose parents were likely siblings. Modern DNA testing on Tutankhamun's remains revealed that his mother and father were closely related, and this inbreeding likely contributed to his frailty and early death. Tutankhamun was found to have suffered from several genetic disorders, including a clubfoot, and his physical condition was further compromised by the fact that he likely suffered from malaria during his short life. His early death at the age of 18 is often attributed to the consequences of his inbred lineage, which left him physically weak and susceptible to diseases. The consequences of inbreeding in the Ptolemaic family were far-reaching, as genetic disorders and a decline in physical and mental health plagued the later generations. This practice of keeping the bloodline pure ultimately weakened the family, and by the time of Cleopatra VII's death, the dynasty had begun to crumble. Cleopatra's death marked the end of the Ptolemaic rule in Egypt, which was subsequently absorbed by the Roman Empire. The Ptolemaic dynasty serves as a stark example of the risks associated with inbreeding among royal families, where the desire to preserve power through bloodlines led to tragic genetic consequences that contributed to the family's downfall. Pitcairn Islanders. The Pitcairn Islanders represent one of the most troubling and unique examples of inbreeding in modern history. Their story began in 1790, when a small group of mutineers from the British HMS Bounty, led by Fletcher Christian, settled on Pitcairn Island, an isolated speck in the South Pacific Ocean. The mutineers, along with a few Tahitian women, created a new community on the island isolated from the rest of the world. This isolation would lead to generations of inbreeding that had devastating consequences for their health and society. The settlers initially tried to live in harmony, but over time the population became increasingly interdependent, with marriages occurring between close relatives. The gene pool was so limited that over the years the community began to experience the effects of genetic disorders, including mental disabilities, physical deformities, and a high incidence of underage sexual relations. By the 1950s, the island's population had grown to 193 people, but the problems stemming from repeated intermarriages were already taking their toll. In the late 20th century, the government of New Zealand began to investigate the situation on Pitcairn Island, uncovering not only widespread incest, but also a shocking culture of sexual abuse and exploitation. In 2004, a court trial exposed the dark underbelly of the Pitcairn community, revealing that nearly a third of the male population had been convicted of sex crimes, including the abuse of underage girls. Many of the children born to the islanders exhibited physical and cognitive impairments, and some children were involved in criminal behavior due to the environment of neglect and abuse in which they were raised. Despite their tragic circumstances, the islanders remained isolated and resistant to outside intervention for much of the 20th century. However, with the increase in global awareness, the situation changed, and in 2004, authorities began to make efforts to relocate the Pitcairn Islanders to nearby islands, providing them with better health care and education. The island's remaining population was reduced to about 50 people by the 2010s. The Pitcairn Islanders serve as a grim reminder of the consequences of inbreeding and isolation. Over generations, their inbreeding not only led to genetic disorders, but also to deep societal issues, including the normalization of sexual abuse and criminal behavior. The island's case is particularly troubling because it highlights how isolation, both geographical and cultural, can perpetuate a cycle of genetic decay and social dysfunction. Today, Pitcairn Island is a small, struggling community with only a few descendants of the original settlers still living there, marked by a history that is as tragic as it is unique. Though the island is no longer completely isolated, the history of the Pitcairn Islanders remains a deeply unsettling chapter in the story of human history. It underscores the dangers of both genetic isolation and the perils of societies left unchecked by the broader world, where the effects of inbreeding and neglect are allowed to persist across generations. Bourbon family. The Bourbon family is one of Europe's most prominent royal dynasties, with its members having ruled over countries such as France, Spain, Naples, Sicily, and Parma for several centuries. The Bourbon family's history is marked by the frequent practice of inbreeding to maintain royal power and preserve bloodlines. However, this practice had devastating effects on the family's genetic health, leading to numerous health complications and genetic disorders that plagued the family for generations. Inbreeding among the Bourbon family was particularly pronounced in the 17th and 18th centuries, when the family sought to consolidate power by marrying within their own ranks. King Philippe V of Spain, one of the most notable figures in the Bourbon lineage, suffered from severe mental health issues that some historians believe were exacerbated by inbreeding. He was often described as mentally unstable, and his reign was marked by political instability. His son, Fernando VI of Spain, also suffered from similar mental health issues, leading many to speculate that the family's repeated intermarriage contributed to the deterioration of their genetic health. One of the most tragic examples of Bourbon inbreeding was the case of King Charles II of Spain, whose reign marked the end of the Spanish branch of the Bourbon dynasty. Charles II's genetic health was severely compromised due to generations of inbreeding. He was plagued by numerous physical and mental disabilities, including infertility and cognitive impairments. His physical appearance was notably deformed, and he was unable to speak or eat properly due to a protruding lower jaw, a hallmark of inbreeding. Charles II's infertility and early death in 1700 led to the extinction of the Spanish Bourbon line, marking the end of an era for the dynasty in Spain. The Bourbon family's continued practice of intermarriage throughout their history also led to widespread infertility, mental illness, and other genetic conditions. Despite these challenges, the Bourbon dynasty continues to have a significant presence in European royal circles, with current members of the family still holding titles in France, Spain, and other regions. However, the family's history serves as a stark reminder of the long-term consequences of inbreeding, both on the physical health of individuals and the political stability of royal families. The Bourbon family's legacy, once defined by power and prestige, is now marred by the genetic toll of generations of strategic marriages within the family. Habsburg family. The Habsburg family, one of Europe's most powerful royal houses, was known for its vast empire, which spanned regions such as Austria, Hungary, Spain, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire. However, the family's desire to maintain control over these vast territories came with a significant cost inbreeding. The Habsburgs were notorious for marrying within their own family and forming alliances with other European royal families through intermarriages. This practice was meant to preserve the purity of their bloodline, but it had devastating consequences for their descendants. The most famous physical manifestation of the Habsburg family's inbreeding was the Habsburg jaw, a protruding lower jaw that became a signature trait among many family members. This condition, also known as mandibular prognathism, made it difficult for those affected to speak and eat properly. However, the genetic repercussions of inbreeding went beyond physical deformities. Mental health issues, infertility, and other genetic disorders were common among the family, and these issues were exacerbated by the repeated practice of marrying cousins and other close relatives. One of the most tragic figures in the Habsburg lineage was Charles II of Spain, whose reign marked the decline of the Spanish branch of the family. Charles II suffered from severe physical and mental disabilities, which many historians believe were the result of inbreeding. He was infertile and unable to produce heirs, which led to the eventual extinction of the Habsburg dynasty in Spain after his death in 1700. His physical deformities and inability to rule effectively were seen as a direct consequence of generations of incestuous marriages within the family. Despite the family's immense political power during the peak of its rule, the genetic damage caused by inbreeding ultimately weakened the Habsburgs and contributed to their downfall. The legacy of the Habsburg family serves as a cautionary tale about the long-term effects of intermarriage, not just on the family itself, but also on the broader political stability of the empire they once ruled. Colt family. The Colt family in New South Wales, Australia became infamous for their horrific and tragic history, which was uncovered in a 2012 investigation. The family was living in extreme isolation on a remote farm where they had been engaging in incestuous relationships for 4 generations. The result was a horrifying cycle of physical and mental disabilities that affected almost every member of the family, with the Colt family growing to include 38 people, many of whom suffered from severe deformities, intellectual disabilities, and other health issues caused by repeated inbreeding. The family's isolated existence, combined with their generational inbreeding, led to severe consequences. Physical disabilities among family members included malformed limbs, facial deformities, and a range of congenital disorders. Many of the children were mentally disabled and had speech and learning impairments. The Colt family was also severely undereducated, with some children requiring remedial instruction due to the neglect and lack of proper schooling. The family's tragic history of incest started with Tim and June Colt, who both came from families with a history of incest. June, born in 1948, was the product of a brother-sister union, and she married Tim, her cousin, in 1966. They had 7 children together, and this set the stage for more inbreeding within the family. The Colt family's story became widely known after police and welfare officers discovered the extent of their suffering and the ongoing abuse within the household. Their case was described by law enforcement as like nothing I've ever seen, with children being subjected to sexual abuse and other forms of neglect. The Colt family's horrific tale highlighted the consequences of extreme isolation and inbreeding. It also revealed the deep psychological and physical toll such practices can have on future generations. In 2004, the New South Wales Children's Court allowed full details of the case to be made public, using pseudonyms for the family's members, further drawing attention to the social and medical problems that plagued this family. The Colt family's story serves as a grim reminder of the severe effects that inbreeding and social isolation can have on families, not only in terms of physical deformities, but also in the deeply rooted psychological and emotional damage that is often passed down through generations. Fugate family. The Fugate family of Troublesome Creek, Kentucky, became famous for their unusual and rare genetic condition that led to a unique phenomenon known as the Blue People of Kentucky. The condition, methemoglobinemia, causes the blood to carry less oxygen, resulting in a bluish tint to the skin. This condition is exceedingly rare and affects less than 0.0035% of the global population. The Fugate family's story is a remarkable and somewhat tragic example of how inbreeding in an isolated community can perpetuate a genetic condition for generations. The roots of the Fugate family's condition can be traced back to the early 1800s, when Martin Fugate, a Frenchman, married Elizabeth Smart, a local woman. Martin carried a genetic defect that caused methemoglobinemia, which was passed down to their children. As the family lived in a secluded rural part of Kentucky, there were very few outside influences, and the Fugates intermarried with neighbors, most notably other families, such as the Combs, Richies, Smiths, and Stacy families, all of whom carried the same gene. This continued for several generations, solidifying the genetic mutation within the family. By the time the Fugate family story became known to the outside world, several members of the family had inherited the gene and developed the telltale blue skin. The most famous member of this family was Luna Fugate, who was often referred to as the bluest family member. Luna, despite her strikingly blue skin, lived a long and relatively healthy life, passing away at 84. Contrary to what many might expect, the Fugates did not suffer from other major health problems due to their condition. Although the blue skin caused them to be subjects of curiosity and even ridicule, the family members were reportedly in good health overall. The Fugates' isolation, however, became a double-edged sword. While it preserved their unique genetic trait, it also led to significant challenges, including limited genetic diversity. Despite the curiosity around their condition, the Fugates are now recognized as an example of how genetic disorders can persist in isolated populations. The case of the Fugate family highlights both the fascinating and sometimes tragic consequences of inbreeding, particularly when it is perpetuated by generations of geographic and social isolation. Over time, the condition gradually became less prevalent in the Fugate family, especially as modern medicine and education began to reach their community. But their legacy remains a vivid reminder of the unexpected outcomes that can arise from the complexities of human genetics and the long-lasting effects of generational isolation. The shocking stories of the 10 most inbred families in world history reveal the dark consequences of genetic isolation. From the Fugate family's blue skin in Kentucky to the Pitcairn Islanders' tragic history, these families offer a chilling look at how inbreeding can devastate both physical health and social structure. These tales raise the question, how much does isolation contribute to such extreme outcomes? And can we truly understand the long-term effects of inbreeding on a community without the wider society's intervention? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Subscribe to Uncovered Tinseltown. Uncovered for more shocking revelations.